Ladies and gentlemen, you're very welcome. It's not often that I get to say ladies and gentlemen. Actually, those of you who've done my teacher training know I don't usually use the word ladies anyway. Humans, you're very welcome. Before I begin, a note about inclusion. I will mostly use the terms woman, women, or female, even though I am aware that anyone who has or had ovaries will at some point experience menopause symptoms, no matter their gender identity. Also, contributing factors to menopause are different throughout cultures and/or ethnicities, and with added difficulties of past trauma, neurodiversity, disability, and/or gender diversity. I primarily address the biochemistry and social implications of the stages of menopause from a perspective of female average onset reproductive aging, but also early surgical and/or treatment of illness-induced menopause. The biochemistry is similar, but the speed of hormonal change, severity of symptoms, level of health risks, and/or external contributing factors can differ. I also remind you, of course, that anything I teach or speak of is not suggested as an alternative to medical care interventions as required or desired. I have to get used to the little blipper. I would also like to affirm that this is an emotive topic, and while I will refer to reproductive stages and humans as a reproducing species, I hold in my heart an awareness of the grief that can be experienced during this time, for example, by people who have wished but not managed to have offspring. I acknowledge also a huge variety of reaction to and opinion about this life phase that the adjectives in this slide represent, as menopause is related to so much more than reproductive aging. And so I begin. A huge heartfelt thank you to Maureen and to Yoga Therapy Ireland for inviting me, and thank you for coming to listen. I am mildly terrified to speak to you today because I'm not a scientist, I don't have a research PhD, and those of you who've taken my teacher training know that I teach quite organically, but I have chosen to make notes because I know that I could go way off time. So I will unfortunately be reading a little, which is not my usual way of teaching, but I think it will mean that I'll get to the nitty-gritty. I've gone on a steep learning curve since I began specialising in the adjustment of my teaching to make it arguably more relevant, achievable, and valuable for women in the stages of menopause. I had gut instincts, but this is often a challenging life phase, and more recently there's been a huge explosion in the conversation about and monetization of menopause. And given the needs of women and their sometimes desperation for answers, gut instincts are not enough. I cannot adequately express how important I feel it is to be aware of this. Women are being, I'm getting emotional saying this, women are being promised so much at a time when they need so much, but there is no intervention, even evidence-based medical treatment, guaranteed to help every individual. If we as teachers make promises based on scanty evidence, or indeed any promise at all, we may at best disappoint our students and be ourselves vulnerable to accusations of making false claims. At worst, we may cause women who come to us hoping for relief to judge themselves as lacking when our promises fail to materialise in them. So for the last 8 years, I've taken myself out of my comfort zone to learn a little about reading research. I aim for the balanced grey areas rather than the wished-for black and white certainties. I'm also delighted to have been invited to speak because when I started to focus on this area in 2015, it seemed like only a few people were talking about or interested in menopause. My dream was that I could help the yoga world listen and notice the need to broaden the consideration it gives to women in menopause. So I launched my certificate in teaching yoga for the stages of menopause in 2020, and I've had hundreds of teachers from around the world, and some here today, train with me. And now I'm invited to share my knowledge with you, so I'm delighted my dream is coming true. People want to listen a little more. And I'm honoured to be in such company with you as an audience and alongside speakers who I will never match for their dedication to years of painstaking research. Do we need menopause on the yoga map. I think we all know that taking into account differences in cultures and countries, women make up the very vast majority of yoga practitioners worldwide, as this conference is certainly indicating. Most schools of yoga tend to accept the need of modifications, additions and subtractions to a yoga practice for women who are pregnant or postnatal, but ignore the more ubiquitous phases of menopause and the changing needs and vulnerabilities of the remaining approximate half of women's lives. Because at least a third of an average expectancy life in the developed world will be spent in the very different organism that is the postmenopausal body. And if she lives into her 80s or 90s, about half a woman's life could be from the onset of symptoms around age 40. On average, most women will spend more years in the stages of menopause than they ever will pregnant or postpartum combined. When I began researching yoga for menopause, what I found was unconvincing to me. Online magazine articles mostly described individual yoga poses with lists of purported benefits, which I realized as I came to learn more were reductive, promised too much, and didn't address the changing physical, energetic, emotional, and health picture of perimenopause and postmenopause. This was not enough. I felt like an explorer of old walking onto an empty land. I planted my flag on the landscape that I wanted to claim for yoga for the stages of menopause. And I wanted to populate it with teachers who understood the need for adjusted practices, had knowledge of the stages of menopause, and were passionate to support them specifically. Of course, unbeknownst to me at the time, there were and are still others focusing on this area, but we have yet to reach a united set of adjustments. Since the recent media explosion, which I suspect you haven't been able to miss, there has been some bandwagon jumping in the wellness world. Much of this is positive. Some, unfortunately, is fear-mongering and or we have the answer promoting. And some of what we are hearing is unhelpful, attributing every midlife struggle to menopause when there can be a number of reasons why women struggle, and men indeed, at any time of life. My hope is that as things settle, all of it will be realistic and promise no quick fixes. I think the yoga world is well placed to lead the way on such a calm and balanced grey area approach. Which of our female students is affected? Well, eventually all of them, almost certainly all those over 40, but also more than you might expect because menopause is not only related to chronological age. The incidence of POI, premature ovarian insufficiency, or very early menopause is growing, or perhaps there are more diagnoses with a growing awareness in the medical community. The statistics regarding full hysterectomy, which can lead to surgical menopause, have waxed and waned over decades. Currently, numbers are declining, but this surgery still affects a huge number of women. A bilateral oophorectomy, the removal of both ovaries, will lead to sudden and permanent menopause at any age. Breast cancer. 75% of breast cancers are estrogen receptor positive, and this requires women to take medications to suppress estrogen or the action of it, leading to menopause, often permanently, not always. International best practice guidelines mean that these women are advised against taking HRT, as you can imagine, even after the years of treatment are over, so they certainly need other supports. Even the average timing of menopause surprises women themselves and has been neglected by the research, medical and self-care worlds. The phase leading up to perimenopause, sometimes referred to as the late reproductive stage, which I'll later refer to as the LRS, is still a niche area which I've been talking about and addressing for years, and has only just made it onto the reputable North American Menopause Society statements. It had in the past mostly been researched with regard to trying to address fertility, which I think is kind of telling in itself. The LRS is one of the chief reasons I address the stages of menopause and not just perimenopause or menopause, because it is characterized by symptoms like anxiety, sleeplessness, and memory issues, despite monthly bleeding, with little or no change to the cycle. This can cause a woman to fear she's becoming unwell because she relates perimenopause to changing menstruation. And often she doesn't make the connection to perimenopause, and neither, unfortunately, does her doctor. Not all doctors, they're beginning to know, but definitely seeing that there's an improvement, but certainly not as wide an awareness of the LRS. The three phases you see here segue into each other but have distinct needs. The LRS is a time when hormone levels do not indicate the use of HRT, so little relief via medical intervention is available, or is at least more tricky. So education to dissipate fear is key. Anticipatory guidance is the phrase used and suggested by the researchers into this area, so that a woman knows what to expect and how to increase her chances of a gentler perimenopause. For my teachers, in addition to giving them a little support with emerging symptoms, I suggest focusing on liver and gut health to support the excretion of used hormones, which can surge to higher than previous levels and need to be eliminated via these organs. But also because a Yoga for Menopause trained teacher may be the person in a woman's life who knows the most about these stages outside, hopefully, her medical team. We may be able to help her manage her well-being before she descends into the fear that can characterize this time. This can make a huge difference in the way that she navigates the next years of perimenopause and her health post-menopause. I'll take a drink while you're taking all these bloody symptoms. Perimenopause itself is a highly symptomatic phase for many, when symptom reduction is usually a woman's priority. Not just a story about the reduction of sex hormones, it also affects levels of melatonin, cortisol, oxytocin, and serotonin, among others. The teaching aim here is to help her with often deeply distressing anxiety, low mood, sleep disruption, overwhelm, aching joints, fatigue, hot flushes, and more. Hormone levels rise and fall, as do symptoms, which are not solely, as I said, because of decreasing estrogen at all, not nearly so simplistic as that. Menopause itself is just one day, acknowledged in retrospect, when menstrual bleeding has been absent for 12 months. In the years post-menopause, the main reproductive hormones are lower than in the reproductive years, but follicle-stimulating hormone can be higher and even create symptoms. However, symptoms do usually resolve post-menopause, so the distinct care here is the application of measures to reduce the risks of injury, heart disease, osteoporosis, dementia, and diabetes, and to improve or stabilize the pelvic floor and improve or stabilize mental health. Distinct care may also include indicating the need to bring to medical attention changes a woman may in the past have self-diagnosed and treated, like thrush or cystitis, the symptoms of which are not unlike other more serious issues that need early intervention. It is understandable that we've been neglectful about these phases and why women report feeling invisible, given that the drive of all species is to make the species more numerous. So we have prioritized the reproductive stages and fertility, particularly in the female. But I would say also that a lack of focus on menopause in the yoga world is as much because of a lack of awareness of the biochemistry of the stages of menopause and their physical, mental, emotional, energetic, and social impacts. But given that the vast majority of women have symptoms, and all women have biochemical changes that increase their health risks post-menopause, and given the number of women over 40 practicing yoga, it is clear to me that these phases and their inclusion in yoga's considerations does, in research speak, warrant further attention. Even before we consider the main health concerns, our teaching should take into account changes seen here and higher risk of injury and longer time for recovery, and the increased reactivity of the nervous system, as well as educating individual teachers about these challenges and when they may begin. I believe the larger yoga world would be responsible if it was willing to learn more than it has generally acknowledged the need for thus far. Because for starters, women deserve better than they are currently facing. They are facing huge variability in medical care, from some GPs still reluctant to prescribe HRT, all the way to expensive private menopause clinics prescribing multiple times the licensed dosages, and sometimes prescribing it to people for whom it is contraindicated in the NICE, the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence's guidelines. HRT is the most proven route for managing some symptoms and protecting future bone and possibly heart health when taken in younger women. But there is variability in efficacy, risks and side effects, and risks increase with age and prolonged use. Indeed, the endocrinologist who has contributed to my training and who has peer-reviewed the medical and biochemistry chapters in my upcoming book has told me that in her clinical experience, only about 54% of women do well on HRT. Plentiful, balanced nutrition can be immensely impactful, but again, though some nutrition experts support women with realistic, risk-free, achievable interventions, there are others touting extremely restrictive diets, often without informing clients and social media consumers of the risks of such protocols. Of course, unfortunately, many of these selling their diets lean towards the emotive topic of weight and the slim ideal as they sell their protocols. Supplements and herbs can have great benefits for some people, but as with medication, have possible side effects and contraindications. Exercise and weight training have been seen to be beneficial to the experience of menopause, and the latter is the most reliable way to build bone. But some protocols, particularly those that are so demanding as to increase the likelihood of injury or depletion at a time of slower recovery and or fatigue, can do more harm than good. In the workplace, women report that their struggles have not been taken seriously by their managers. And what about our teachers? What about us? We are a self-employed workforce, also prey to added stress and marginalisation in the menopausal transition. In fact, many teachers I have trained speak about their fear that they are no longer good enough at yoga to be worthy teachers. This is both because they began feeling less comfortable in their asana practice, but also to experience low mood, self-esteem issues, brain fog and anxiety, which they felt they needed to hide from their students. This affected their fluidity and confidence in teaching and led them to question their value. Many of these are teachers with decades of experience whose throwing in the towel would be a huge loss to their students and the yoga community. Whew. What does yoga offer us so far? I was practicing this speech and I was thinking it's so dry, and here I am nearly crying. Yoga as it stands can already be of benefit to practitioners in menopause, of course. A high level of significance was seen in this recent study on symptom experience in regular practitioners. Vasomotor, FYI, is the collective term for night sweats and hot flushes. And for them to be less of an issue is very valuable. I suggest that this study is a great indicator that because yoga can address 3 of the 4 pillars of health, namely stress management, sleep and exercise, and indeed as a sideline, yoga does talk about nutrition and advises balanced nutrition, the 4th pillar. Those who practice it are, as this study proves, somewhat likelier to have a less stormy experience than those who don't practice. But I read this and I thought, not far off 40% with no symptoms? Frankly, what the heck? And then I read further. I have taught hundreds of teachers of peri or post-menopausal age, committed yogis all, and not one of them have been symptom-free, and some have really struggled. My guess is that what set the yogis apart from the physically active and sedentary cohorts in this study is stress reduction and a greater likelihood of a healthier lifestyle. In fact, the study reported just that. The women didn't drink much or smoke, for starters. Despite all these caveats, I have unfortunately seen this study quoted as a come hither to women to take up yoga during perimenopause to relieve their symptoms, when that timing is not what this study indicates. And anyway, I would like to see yoga make some adjustments that could mean that a person wouldn't have to be practicing almost daily for more than a decade to feel its benefits. I may seem cynical, but the nature of Western scientific research is that it goes back and tries to pull apart that which has been proven, and I guess that's my intention here, to question. But I am sure that yoga helps already. We have an abundance of research that shows that yoga as a whole can improve much of what's listed here, including vagal tone, supporting the nervous system, anxiety, concentration, balance, feel-good hormone levels, and strength. And it can support many of the health challenges listed here, including lung function, reduced lung function, blood sugar regulation, increased telomere length, which is associated with slower aging, reduced oxidative stress, and better inflammation regulation, also associated with aging and with pain and disease. It's very much worth mentioning and quite exciting that Kirtan Kriya, the Satanama chanting practice, has been seen to have positive results in those with subjective cognitive decline and some who may be at risk of the development of Alzheimer's dementia. So much so that it is recommended by some Alzheimer's organisations. And Kapalabhati has some benefits shown through studies for pelvic floor strength and reduction of urinary leakage in menopausal women. That's a fantastic new bit of, or a bit of study that I haven't come across until Maureen asked me to do this piece. The results of this study by Dr. Kramer, who's joining you tomorrow, are really encouraging and show that in many ways yoga is seen to support menopause symptoms. But unsurprisingly, it is often beneficial when compared to usual care, which in this case would mean things like, advice from the doctor and, doing the kind of stuff that we can easily Google, I guess. So beneficial when compared to usual care or sedentary groups, or seen to be comparable to exercise, which doesn't really set it apart. And at any rate, the biochemistry of menopause after most breast cancer treatment is different to that of average onset, often leading to more intense and clustered symptoms, so that this study is for quite a specific cohort. I wouldn't be surprised if it is referenceable elsewhere, but we have to be aware of that. Here we see that benefits were better only than for those who did nothing to support themselves. And yoga was no more positive than exercise in terms of beneficial results, except for the experience of vasomotor symptoms. I'm going to give you a moment to read that while I take a drink. Often I've got in bold, obviously, the stuff I want you to just tune into. You will get a copy of these slides, by the way. So here we also see much less than delightful results. In the last point on this slide, we see that it was unfortunately in the more well-run studies is where the less favourable results were. So why are these systematic reviews showing us unconvincing results when it comes to symptoms? If yoga helps in the ways I listed, surely it should show up reliably in perimenopause. But maybe that's because the yoga that's been used in these studies is simply insufficiently targeted, because perimenopause is a notoriously tricky customer, as any of you who are going through it or have been through it will know. And what works in the decades before menopause is seen to work less readily in perimenopause. For example, improved sleep is one of yoga's greatest triumphs. But this is much more difficult to positively affect from any angle without the sedating effects of progesterone and with reduced melatonin, and with one of the greatest contributors to sleep disturbance being hot flushes and night sweats. So understandably, the study found that yoga's benefits for sleep were less effective for peri- and postmenopausal than for premenopausal subjects. Though it can help us meet challenge with equilibrium, yoga can't make the brain decide a greater variation of body heat is safe. So if it decides a hot flush is warranted, it will create one. Also, when we are asleep, we can't consciously intervene with a calming breath practice, and the body will throw out a burst of noradrenaline and cortisol to wake us up and sort ourselves out so we don't overheat. This hormone spike, by the way, may be why many women report a feeling of dread just before a hot flush. Some of you who have been in perimenopause may have that experience. Indeed, Dr. Mary Flaherty, who dived into thousands of studies on the benefits of yoga, finds overall that though yoga helps with hot flushes more than, for example, exercise, aiding women to manage and or tolerate them better, it does not, as I have seen claimed, reduce frequency. Poor sleep is a huge contributor to the symptoms of perimenopause and to health risks for anyone. So if we can't improve sleep because we can't improve one of the main causes of waking, perhaps we can see why the results for sleep are not what we hope for in perimenopause. HRT, or hormone replacement therapy, and the consumption of phytoestrogen-rich foods or supplements after discussion with a doctor, use of some adaptogens, stress management techniques, and avoidance of some triggers are the main ways seen to have convincing effects on vasomotor symptoms. Personally, for nighttime flushes, I find it is only the avoidance of triggers like alcohol and sugar and caffeine, but I don't take that, I just haven't written that down. And sleeping in a very cool room, that helps. How might yoga get more menopause specific in the hopes of better results? First, I wonder, can yoga harm a woman in these life stages? I would argue that some of the various traditions are slow to accept or unaware of the need to make changes in the way the resources of pranayama, meditation, and asana are practiced to address trauma sensitivity and or make practices less complex and more achievable. In my opinion, this could do with changing. When the body becomes less able for strenuous and or end of range of motion postures, women can lose confidence, self-esteem, and a desire to continue their practice. So adeptly delivered and demonstrated alternatives could be, in my mind, more ubiquitous, especially when there is greater risk of cartilage, ligament, and or tendon damage, vertebral compression fractures, and or arthritis. It's quite new, isn't it, this menopause thing? The sense of yoga as a linear practice with a final goal in asana, pranayama, or meditation may make it damaging or difficult in the face of physical changes as I listed, a dysregulated nervous system, symptoms like dizziness, fatigue, and anxiety, trauma resurgence, which is not uncommon in perimenopause, time poverty, and typical family obligations at the average age of menopause. So we could soften the intention to progress and look for achievable real-life applications. The sameness of practice may mean we are missing possible benefits for the protection of brain and body health, given that we know that variety of exercise is optimal and novelty is an important part of brain protective measures. This is why yoga for the stages of menopause includes additions for neurological and physical stimulus and steers away from a repeated sequence each class. The way yoga sells itself may even do harm. I've seen many articles talking about the benefits of some specific posture or other as relieves menopause symptoms or balances hormones, which aside from being simplistic and unreliable, are often published without contraindications for type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, or even low bone density, which some statistics show is present in over half of Caucasian and Asian women over 50. That's low bone density, not full osteoporosis, but osteopenia. We should be clear and realistic because what women may extrapolate from such claims is not always going to be alongside a nuanced ability to read between the lines. In the West, there is a considerable enmeshment of the world of yoga with diet culture and the cult of the youthful body beautiful. Many yoga teachers feel a pressure to appear slim, bendy, in perfect health and youthful, and the result is that this is how most advertising of yoga appears. This is immensely impactful on a group of women who report hating the changes in their weight, their youthfulness, their energy and flexibility. It is also impactful on those teachers whose experience I spoke of earlier. I encourage my graduates to be truthful and share their own struggles and perceived imperfections. Here's some better news. This study added positive support information, which includes positive psychological hints and information about menopause and individualized recommendations. The results and methods were excellent and give credence to the benefit of yoga designed specifically for menopause, rather than just does what we do in yoga already help. What it lacks, in my estimation, is that it deals with some symptoms, but is not then also tweaked to prioritize certain health concerns, which I have listed, and do address. This study was carried out in 2020, and I'm kind of proud to say that I hadn't read it before creating my teacher training. Gut instincts stand for something. Because information, or as I call it, awareness, is the beginning of my trainings and my workshops and the classes of my graduates. A factually accurate, informative, and empathetic sharing circle. I'm trying to, I have changed the slide, thank you. Thank you. Who am I thanking? I'm thanking me. May be the most beneficial part of yoga for the stages of menopause. In the late reproductive stage, offering anticipatory guidance to help women enter perimenopause better prepared. In perimenopause, aha moments that reduce fear and normalize experiences. One of you in the room was talking about their aha moments on my training. Teaching that HRT is not a cop-out for those who feel they need it, nor is it a necessary cure-all for those afraid because they can't take or tolerate it. And also reminders that small tweaks may transform their experience. In postmenopause, reminders that women can intervene effectively to look after their health as they age, and how to do that. So much for awareness. We move on to further core principles of my teaching. Acceptance. Sharing perspectives that can enhance a woman's ability to come to accept her life stage so that she is not adding to her load through fighting what cannot be fought. A study found that people who had a positive attitude to aging experienced less frailty. And anecdotally, many working to support women in menopause find that acceptance of it can reduce the intensity of the experience. Adaptation. Helping her understand where she can adapt life outside her yoga practice and within it to better support her strengths and vulnerabilities. Advocacy. Empowering her through knowledge to advocate for herself with her medical providers, her colleagues, her wellness providers, even her yoga teachers, and her family via her growing awareness of what she can be expected to manage and what she may need in order to feel better and protect her health. How else might we maximize what's already in yoga? We do have a well-embedded research on yoga-like practices that are cited by the medical community and by reputable menopause organizations. In fact, in many ways, yoga has, as I'm sure you can, as you know, so many elements which I would argue have been taken from yoga and deftly researched and called a different name. Elements which yogis came up with way before we knew way before there was anything like the knowledge we have now on biology, biochemistry, and the nervous system. Regarding paced breathing, here on your left, here in bold at the bottom, you see that along with the deep breathers, 46% of the women who paused for 15 minutes to breathe at their usual rate also saw improvements, which I never see mentioned in articles about paced breathing for hot flushes. I believe this pausing is beneficial because, apart from HRT, phytoestrogens, and the removal of triggers, stress reduction is key. And just as in yoga, the CBT researchers believe that improvements are due to conscious attitude to the flushes rather than reduction of frequency, seen in bold on the right at the bottom. There are links emerging between cortisol dysregulation, the HPA axis, and severity of hot flushes, about which we will know more in years to come, and many women will be unsurprised by this. But it certainly upholds why paced breathing, CBT, and indeed yoga that doesn't unwittingly add to levels of stress should significantly age the intensity of vasomotor symptoms. In Yoga for the Stages of Menopause trainings, I ask that for now we focus where the research is. So we can say that paced breathing, which is very much like yogic breathing, has seen positive results for hot flushes and anxiety in menopausing women, which may support sleep. CBT, which is very like Pratipaksha Bhavana, which translates as opposite sentiment, has been seen to be effective for hot flushes and anxiety too. I would argue that CBT also falls under the umbrellas of Satya because it aims to help the individual connect with what is true in a situation rather than catastrophizing, and even Ahimsa because to connect with the catastrophe is to harm oneself with a vicious cycle of stimulus, heated reaction, and further struggle. CBT for insomnia has had favourable results for sleep in menopause and adds extra elements including progressive relaxation, which obviously we do quite well as yoga teachers. Studies using mindfulness meditation also show improved subjective sleep, hot flush intensity, and anxiety. This is all great, but it's my conviction that yoga can offer even more. Along with what you see here, there are many parts of the tradition of yoga, including those perhaps underused, particularly in the West, that I prioritize in Yoga for Menopause, such as chanting or humming for vagus nerve stimulation, tongue exercises, also for the vagus nerve, and for tongue strength, which can lessen in older age, affecting people's ability to eat. Eye exercises may help to improve memory and stimulate neurological growth. Uddiyana Bandha, which has had some research in a form called hypopressive training, has been seen to be an effective way of addressing some pelvic floor prolapse. Restorative yoga and shavasana are prioritized because of the need and value of rest at times of any health challenge. Achievable balance challenges, posture care, and muscular demand for bone protection and for brain challenge are also a major focus. And considerable time is given to pelvic floor health through Mula Bandha, pelvic floor relaxation, breathwork, and postures. Here in the pink box is an example of how a class might look. I know my slides are so flippin' messy compared to all the ones I've seen in the talk so far, but definitely not a PowerPoint hero. Here in the pink box is an example of how a class might look. So far, so normal yoga, but there are priorities in yoga for menopause which I believe are unique. Space to speak, because many women feel ashamed, embarrassed, alone, and or that no one wants to hear. Empathetic company and support also help with the production of some of the feel-good hormones, which are beneficial and can actually be acted, or we can actually act to increase the feel-good hormones. Education includes the whys of symptoms from joint pain to lack of patience, advice regarding supports outside yoga, including balanced sharing of international guidelines on HRT, support managing the media frenzy, social implications and pressures that exacerbate experiences, and sharing lifestyle and perspective shifts to support symptoms and health concerns. Trauma sensitivity, as old traumas can resurface, and indeed women often experience some of the traits of traumatic stress, like feeling out of control and unsafe in their bodies. And sadly, women with a history of childhood trauma have been seen to have a more symptomatic perimenopause. So gentle, trauma-sensitive, interoceptive tools to aid women in staying connected to their body, self-led practice for pleasure, to boost the feel-good hormones, cultivate self-agency, encourage the avoidance of pain and create a more positive connection to a changing body, including connection to the vulva and the vagina at a time when genital changes can make women disconnect and neglect, which may reduce pleasure, but also increase the risk of ignoring changes that need investigation. Functional and therapeutic yoga principles to help avoid injury and to make the practice more achievable, to boost self-esteem, aiming towards active range of motion for use in life through the decades rather than passive stretching to increase asana achievement. Nonetheless, we are also aiming for eustress, for positive stress, for bone and muscle stimulus, using resistance band, light weights, body weight with added muscular challenge cues. This strength focus also supports mental health. Brain stimulus through eye exercises, slightly different to what is in the yoga canon, but more the kind of stuff you would expect in a neurologist consultation. Vestibular challenges, cognitive load, non-dominant extremity training, novelty, and other stimuli are added. Emotional components for acceptance and resilience in the face of an emotionally turbulent time, where changing emotions are often portrayed as negative, but also strategies to shift energy and emotional stuckness when life calls for it. For instance, voluntary facial action, bringing onto your face the expression of that which you would like to feel rather than how you are feeling, which has convincing results for immediate short-term relief. Touch, where actively assented to for support of the feel-good hormones. Achievability, and by teaching movement and stress management snacks, that's a big part, that can be used in isolation for the time poor or overwhelmed perimenopauser. In addition to offering the why of certain practices, the teacher will be indicating the benefits of a little of them every day. Importantly, a teacher will not be promising that yoga can do it all, and advising on such things as the need for a variety of exercise, sleep hygiene, and rich nutrition. A teacher will also be trained to hold space for a huge variety of knowledge, misinformation confused as knowledge, fear, grief, empowerment, acceptance, denial, history, choice of medical care, and more in their classes. Holding classes and workshops in yoga for menopause is a big undertaking. It also offers some of the most nourishing rewards of any type of yoga I have ever taught. I have my own passions, but I would also like to see a gathering of teachers around the world who have been inventing their yoga for menopause to see can we create a consensus to begin to offer the yoga world at large. Yoga teachers are doing wonderful things to include those of us with physical disability or challenges, variety of body shapes, race, genders, and ages. I ask yoga to continue its efforts towards inclusion by recognizing the stages of menopause as having distinct needs and to fill the gap between yoga for pregnancy and yoga for the golden years. My hopes are that some fabulous researcher will drop me a line and say, hey, we'd love to research your protocol, you just teach and we'll do the rest. Including menopause more consciously may help women who report feeling marginalized, invisible, and confused to feel held, validated, and realistically and specifically supported in this universal shape-shift of their entire being. I have an in-person training coming up in or near Dublin in August and online dates in September. It'd be an honour to see you there. Men and women are welcome. Unfortunately, I can't be here tomorrow, so I'm happy to ask to linger and answer any questions outside until we're kicked out. But in the meantime, thank you for listening.